All right, folks, we are now on to Chapter 4 of Animal Farm. By the late summer, the news of what had happened on Animal Farm had spread across half the country. Every day, Snowball and Napoleon sent out flights of pigeons whose instructions were to mingle with the animals on neighboring farms and tell them the story of the rebellion and to teach them the tune of Beast of England. Most of this time, Mr. Jones had spent sitting in the tap room of Red Lion at Willingdon, complaining to anyone who would listen of the monstrous injustice he had suffered and being turned out of his property by a pack of good-for-nothing animals. The other farmers sympathized in principle, but they did not give him much type of help either. At heart, each of them was secretly wondering whether he could not somehow turn Jones's misfortune into their own advantage. It was lucky that the owners of the two farms which adjoined Animal Farm were on permanently bad terms. One of them, which was known as Foxwood, was a large, neglected, old-fashioned farm, much overgrown by woodland, with its pastures worn out and its hedges in a disgraceful condition. Its owner, Mr. Plinkington, was an easygoing gentleman farmer who spent most of his time in fishing or hunting according to the season. The other farm, which was called Pinchfield, was smaller and better kept. Its owner was a Mr. Frederick, a tough, shrewd man, perpetually involved in lawsuits with a name for driving hard bargains. These two disliked each other so much that it was difficult for them to come to any agreement, even in defense of one's own interests. Nevertheless, they were both thoroughly frightened by the rebellion on Animal Farm, and very anxious to prevent their own animals from learning too much about it. At first, they pretended to laugh to scorn at the idea of animals managing a farm for themselves. The whole thing would be over in a fortnight, they said. They put in it about the animals on the Manor Farm. They insisted in calling it Manor Farm. They would not tolerate the name Animal Farm, that was for sure. They would just insist that they had to be perpetually fighting amongst themselves and were also rapidly starving to death. When time passed and the animals had evidently not starved to death, though, Frederick and Pinkerton changed their tune and began to talk of the terrible wickedness that now flourished on Animal Farm. It was given out that animals were practiced cannibalism. They tortured one another with red-hot horseshoes and had their females in common. This is what came of rebelling against the laws of nature, Frederick and Pilkington said. However, these stories were never fully believed. Rumors of a wonderful farm, where the human beings had been turned out and the animals managed their own affairs, continued to circulate in vague and distorted forms, and throughout that year a wave of rebelliousness ran around the countryside. Bulls, which had always been tractable, suddenly turned savage. Sheep broke down hedges and devoured the clover. Cows began to kick the pails over. Hunters refused their fences and shot their riders onto other sides. And above all the tune, each and every time any of these things heard, people could hear the words of Beast of the Nation. These words began to be known everywhere. It spread with astonishing speed. The human beings could not contain their rage when they heard this song either, though they pretended to think it merely was ridiculous. They could not understand, they said, how even animals could bring themselves to sing such contemptible rubbish. Any animal caught singing it was giving a flogging on the spot. And yet the song was irrepressible. The blackbirds whistled in the hedges, pigeons cooted in the elms. Gosh, it had got into the dim of the smithies and a tune of the church bells. And when the human beings listened to it, they secretly trembled, hearing in it a prophecy of their future dooms. Early in October, when the corn was cut and stacked and some of it was already threshed, the flight of pigeons came whirling through the air and alighted the yard of the Animal Farm in the wildest excitement. Jones and all his men, with half a dozen others from Foxwood and Pinchfield, had entered the 5-barred gate and had come up the cart track that led to Animal Farm. They were all carrying sticks, except for Jones, who was marching ahead with a gun at his hands. Obviously, they were going to attempt to recapture the farm. This had long been expected, though, and all the precautions had been made. Snowball, who had studied an old book of Julius Caesar's campaign, which he had found in the farmhouse, was in charge of defensive operations. He gave his orders quickly, and in a couple of minutes, every animal was at their post. As the animals began to approach the farm building, Snowball launched his first attack. All the pigeons, to the number of 35, flew to and fro over the men's head and muted upon them from midair. That's right, they pooped all over them. And while the men were dealing with this poop, the geese, who had been hiding among the hedge, rushed out, and they began to peck at all of them viciously on the calves of their legs. However, this was only a light skirmishing maneuver, intended to create a little disorder, and the men easily drove the geese off them with their sticks. Snowball now launched his second line of attack. Muriel, Benjamin, and all the sheep, with Snowball at the head of them, rushed forward them and prodded and butted the men from every side, while Benjamin turned around and lashed at them with his small hooves. But once again the men with their sticks and their hobnailed boots were too strong for them, and suddenly at the squeal from Snowball, which was a signal for retreat, all the animals turned and fled through the gateway of the yard. The men gave a shout of triumph. They saw as they imagined their enemies in sight, and they rushed after them in disorder. This was just what Snowball had intended, though, and as soon as they were well inside the yard, 3 horses, 3 cows, and the rest of the pigs who had been lying in ambush in the cowshed suddenly emerged in the rear, cutting them all off. Snowball now gave them the signal for charge. He himself dashed straight for Jones. Jones saw him coming, and he raised his gun and he fired, but the pellets scored bloody streaks along Snowball's back, and a sheep at that moment dropped dead. Without halting though for an instant, Snowball flung his 15 stones against Jones's legs. Jones was hurled into a pile of dung, which is poop, and his gun flew out of his hands. But the most terrifying spectacle of all of it was Boxer, who reared up one of his hind legs and he began striking anything that got close to him. He struck with his great iron hoofs like a stallion. His very first blow took a stable lad from Foxwood on the skull, and it stretched him lifeless in the mud. At that sight, several men dropped their sticks and they tried to run. Panic overtook them, and in the next moment all the animals together were chasing them around the yard. They were gored, kicked, bitten, and trampled on. But most importantly, they were retreating. There was not an animal on the farm that did not take vengeance upon them after his own fashion. Even the cats suddenly leapt off the roof onto a cowman's shoulders and sank their claws into their necks as they ran away. They yelled horribly as this happened. At a moment when the opening was clear, the men were glad enough to rush out of the yard and make a bolt for the main road. And so within 5 minutes of their invasion, they were an ignominious retreat by the same way as they had come, and the flock of geese hissing after them and pecking at their calves all the way as they ran away. All the men were gone except for one. Back in the yard, Boxer was pawing him with his foot at the stable lad who lay face down in the mud, trying to turn him over. But the boy just did not stir. "He is dead," said Boxer sorrowfully. "I had no intention of doing that. I forgot that I was wearing iron hooves. Who will believe that I did not do this on purpose?" "No sentimentality, comrade," cried Snowball, from whose wounds the blood was still dripping. "War is war. The only good human being is a dead human being, after all." "I have no wish to take human life, not even to take any life, let alone a human life," repeated Boxer, and his eyes were full of tears. "Where's Molly?" somebody exclaimed. Molly, in fact, was missing, and for a moment there was a great alarm. It was feared that the men might have harmed her in some way, or even carried her off with them. In the end, however, she was hiding among her stall, with her head buried among the hay in the manger. She had taken to flight as soon as the gunshot went off, and when the other animals came back from the looking for her, it was to find that that stable lad, who in fact was only stunned, had been recovered and made off. The animals now reassembled in the wildest excitement, each recounting his own exploits in the battle on the top of their voice. An impromptu celebration of the victory was held immediately. The flag was run up, and Beast of Nations was sung a number of times. Then the sheep who had been killed was given a solemn funeral, a hawthorn bush being planted on her grave. And at the graveside, Snowball made a small speech emphasizing the need for all animals to be ready to die for Animal Farm, if need be. The animals decided unanimously to create a military decoration, Animal Hero First Class, which was to be conferred there and then on Snowball and Boxer. It consisted of a brass medal. There were really some old horse brasses which had been found in the harness room to be worn on Sundays and holidays. There was also Animal Hero Second Class, which was conferred posthumously on the dead sheep. There was so much discussion to what the battle should be called, and in the end it was named the Battle of Cowshed, since that had been where the ambush had been sprung. Mr. Jones's gun had been found lying in the mud, and it was known that there was a supply of cartridges in the farmhouse. It was decided to set the gun up at the foot of the flagstaff like a piece of artillery and to fire it twice a year, once on October the 12th, the anniversary of the Battle of Cow's Head, and once on the Midsummer Day, the anniversary of the rebellion. All right, guys, that was a quick chapter here. They fought them off. Once again, I want you to think, how would you do against an army of cows? I think they needed more guns, personally. But an army of cows, pigs, all the other farm animals, if they were truly somehow smarter, do you think we would stand a chance as humans against them? That is my question. Take care, everybody. Bye.